Do you have?
Can you see my screen?
I can see it.
I'm just going to assume everyone else can see it too.
I don't see anybody raising their hand that they can't. If you can see the screen, just raise your hand. Yep, everybody says they can see it. Thanks,
Great.
Chris. Thanks, Drew.
Great. All right. So welcome to today's webinar. As Rob said, my name is Kevin Graham. I'm an IT support consultant for Synergy. As an IT support consultant, part of my job is to assist clients with technical issues, reporting, installations, and in this case today, recovery. So let's go ahead and get started. So for today's agenda, we'll be talking about different kinds of disasters. So there's several different scenarios when it comes to disaster recovery. Many Dynamics SL environments are set up differently than others. I'll try to touch on most of the different types of environments and explain the different kinds of disasters and recovery methods for each of them. Dynamics SL has some specific concerns regarding security and potential loss of data in the case of a disaster. So we'll talk about some of these concerns and best practices for backing up the specific files and folders. And then we'll talk about different kinds of things that need to be backed up regularly. Where does your data live? Where do your reports live? Is there anything that exists on your server to prevent you from doing business if it's lost? Then we'll talk about different recovery methods for these different scenarios. So these include discussions on how to recover corrupt or lost data. After we talk about the recovery methods, we'll talk about, we'll review the process for recovering your data. So you have backups, but what do you do with them once you need to recover your data? So finally, we'll talk about the current status of your recovery process. Is your server keeping regular database backups? Are those backups being taken off-site? I'll show you how you can check to see if your databases are being backed up regularly. At the end of the presentation, I'll be happy to take any questions or comments from the audience. Okay, disaster recovery questions. So what kinds of disasters are there? Well, there's server crashes, which pretty much means your server is no longer operable. Maybe the hard drive has failed and is unrecoverable. You've experienced a power surge, a flood, fire, ceiling crashed down on your server, something like that. Those are all server crashes. So regarding SL, you may have a single server or multi-server solution. Single server means that your application, Dynamics SL, SQL Server, and your web server are all one and the same. They're all living on the same server. The other option that you may have is a multi-server solution. So those are multiple servers. So you could have one for Dynamics SL installation, you could have another one for SQL Server, and maybe even another one for your web hosting, so web apps if you have it. Any of these servers can be physical or virtual servers, like in a Hyper-V solution, which is actually becoming very common nowadays. The other option, or the other types of disaster, is corrupted files. So you may have corrupted files due to failed or failing hardware or malware. This can include database corruption, or maybe Dynamics SL applications folder gets corrupted. So in other words, the data is there, but it's completely inaccessible. So this leads us to crypto attacks. So crypto attacks, sometimes known as ransomware, happen when a user clicks on the wrong attachment or web page. The ransomware can then infect, take control, and encrypt any file the infected user has access to. So it may make the files unusable, and the attacker puts the encrypted files up for ransom. So for a fee, you can actually pay these people and they will decrypt the files and bring you back to normal. Of course, if you have a good backup, you won't need to pay the fee because you can just restore your files from backup and get rid of these encrypted files. Synergy has actually had clients that did not have good backups and ended up having to pay a ransom to get their files back. Prior to working with Synergy, I was actually at a company where a user clicked on one of these attachments, which then encrypted all the files the user had access to. This included all public drives, the user's files, even Dynamics SL shared drive. So every file was hidden and encrypted and replaced with a copy. So anyone thinking they were clicking on a file that they needed actually ended up downloading and then spreading the virus further. So you can see the potential risk there. So we had to get IT involved. We went through a long multi-day process where the backups were being restored and then somebody else got infected. We'd have to do the process over and over again. So, the big takeaway from this entire presentation, I'm going to say over and over again, is backup, backup, backup. This particular user had access to public drives, Dynamics SL, accounting files, accounting folders, almost everything on all the servers because they were one of the AR clerks. So what kinds of recovery methods are there? If you simply have corrupt data, or maybe the SQL server failed over the weekend, but your application server is still up and running, you may have to just restore backups of your database. This process actually doesn't take very long. As long as you have the backups, you can simply restore over your old one, and you should be pretty much back up and running. It doesn't take too long, and it doesn't take a lot of effort, as long as you have the backups. Or maybe the server is no longer working. Your server crashed. You may have to spin up a new physical or virtual server or servers to restore Dynamics SL and the server application. So that would be migrating to a new server. Or maybe your application server failed or crashed. So that means your databases are intact, but the application was lost due to a server crash or malware. So it may be necessary to spin up a new server and install Dynamics SL again. So as long as you have a backup of your applications folder, after reinstallation, you can restore a lot of those things from backup, and you can be back up and running fairly quickly. Okay, so specific Dynamics SL considerations. So what's the potential loss when something happens to your applications folder? So here's some examples. Your user reports folder, attachments, Solomon.ini. I'm going to go through each one of these and show you some actual examples. Your third-party software, custom applications, maybe your FRX folder. So I'm going to go ahead and show you some of these examples. Dynamics SL, one of the most common, and most of your users actually already know about it, is the applications folder. So that's this guy right here. Within the applications folder, you have folders that have each of your modules. There's also a number of other folders, such as attachments, which may house all of your attachments if you use that module to keep track of, say, your sales orders or your purchase orders or things like that. So if you lose this folder and you don't have a backup, then you've lost all of those attachments. The attachments folder may not actually be located in the applications folder. It could be located pretty much anywhere as long as your users have access to them. So if you don't know where this is, you can open up Dynamics, and as an administrator, you can open up attachments configuration and look down here in the existing folder location. So there are many different configuration possibilities for the attachments configuration. If you have a default setting for all of your different screens, you can type in default, and find your existing location. You can have different locations for each different screen. So if you know the screen and the table, you can find the different locations by clicking on each one of those. One of the most important, I would say, folder in the applications folder that has potential for loss is the user reports folder. So any standard report that you may have modified yourself or had Synergy modify for you lives in this user reports folder, regarding the Crystal reports anyway. So any one of these reports has been modified. You may have only a few here, or you may have dozens. Any one of these reports, if you lose it, it could mean several hours to dozens or even hundreds of hours to restore these if they're lost permanently. So very, very important to make sure that these user reports are backed up. The Solomon INI file, this is a configuration file. It's actually not modified a whole lot, and if you lose it, I wouldn't say that you're going to lose a whole lot of things, but it does store some very specific report locations. It also has some server-side timeout methods. If you've ever had some issues and we've had to modify them, then this is something you might want backed up. Third-party software. So if you use anything in SL that's not standard, chances are it's a third-party product that integrates with SL, or it's a custom application. So in either case, these files likely live in the applications folder, and sometimes they'll start with an X. So I have a couple of examples here. They may not start with an X. They may like e-banking, I think, has its own that lives in its own folder. But just something to keep in mind. Now, if these folders are lost, that doesn't mean you lost everything regarding that third party. A lot of the data and configuration is set up in the databases, but a lot of the installs and executables and reports may live in here. So, it's always good to have those backed up as well. Okay, now the FRX folder also may not actually live in the applications folder, but a lot of times we do end up installing it in here. So if you back up the entire applications folder, you're also backing FRX up. But if FRX is not installed in the applications folder, you might want to find out where that's installed, because if you lose that folder, then you're going to lose all your report definitions, your columns, your trees, all those kinds of things, which also could potentially mean hundreds of hours of loss. Okay. So why so much focus on the applications folder? Well, you can see here, I have this drive mapped. So if I was infected with a virus, it would affect everything that I have access to. So that's all of these folders up here. But it also means anything that I have a map drive location to. So this is a shared drive that takes me to the applications folder. It also takes me to my media, any custom reports, the Synergy folder, which houses a lot of the customizations that we may have done for you. It has access to all of these things. So any user that has potential of getting a virus could actually end up sending malware to that particular folder, and you could have a lot of loss. Okay, so what needs to be backed up? When it comes to files and folders, you definitely want to make sure this Dynamics SL applications folder is backed up. A lot of times the Synergy folder will be right next to that. The media folder may be outside of the Synergy folder. It may be on its own drive. It may be in its own location that your IT has set up. So it's probably not as important as your applications folder, because a lot of times that software may be out of date and you may need to get new software anyway when in the event of a crash and you need to reinstall stuff. So it may be a good idea to keep track of that, but it's not necessarily as important as the applications folder. Also, you might want to make sure that you need to back up any folders that you know have custom applications, anything that we have created for you or maybe you created for yourselves. FRX, installation files, maybe documentation, anything that you any documentation that you may have on the servers for your users that you don't have backups of. And then I'll stress again the user reports folder. Okay, so databases. You have a system database that houses your configuration for Dynamics SL, and you may have one or many application databases. Now, these are typically backed up anyway through SQL Server. So what you need to do is make sure that the backups are being backed up and taken somewhere offsite. And I'll expand on that a little bit. There's a Management Reporter database if you use Management Reporter. There is also a Management Reporter DM database that houses your data mart, your data warehouse for Management Reporter. That does not need to be backed up because it's fairly easy to rebuild the data mart. So really all you really need from Management Reporter is this Management Reporter database. Now this database houses all your report definitions and security for Management Reporter. So if you lose that, there's a potential loss for all of your financial reporting. So make sure that that's backed up. There's also Report Server database. It's just called Report Server typically. That's if you use web apps or SSRS, then this database houses all of your security settings, your configuration for SSRS, and all of your reports. So you can back up and technically restore your reports from this report server database should your server crash. Now there is some rebuilding that needs to happen once this is restored, but at least your reports themselves would be intact. Also, any third-party software databases you might want to have backed up. There's some things that come to mind if you use Timeline or BI360. They have their own data warehouses that you might need to keep track of and back up. Another program I know, FastPath Audit, has their own database. So and we typically keep it on the same environment as your app and sys databases. So also make sure that those are backed up. I'll just give you a quick view of these different databases. So this is the Management Reporter database. Like I said, the DM does not need to be backed up. Report Server and Report Server PBI, this is just something I was testing with, but anything that says Report Server, you might want to back up in case you use SSRS. Also the app and sys databases. Of course, if your server is virtual, like if it's a Hyper-V image, then chances are you can just take a full snapshot backup of your server. So if you do that, then and you do it on a daily basis, then the most you can lose is 1 day. So virtual snapshots are actually a pretty good idea. Okay, so typical file locations. Where is your applications folder? So the C apps folder is typically where Synergy will install Dynamics SL. In the past couple years since we've been installing SL 2015. If you haven't had an upgrade recently, the default location, even for 2015, will try to install to Program Files x86, Microsoft Dynamics folder. So look in both of those locations to see where your applications folder is. Your databases can be pretty much anywhere. The default location is on the C drive of the SQL Server under Program Files, Microsoft SQL Server, and then this string here, MS SQL 12, SQL 2014. This is probably different on yours because this is just the name of your SQL Server instance. So this can be something like this, but probably not exactly like that. Followed by MS SQL and then backup. So this is where your backups are located. So yes, your server is taking backups of your database, but you need to make sure that you're backing up your backups somewhere other than on your server. Another possibility for your database location is on another drive on the SQL Server, or maybe a drive somewhere, well, likely not a drive outside of the server, but it is possible. So also, if you use web apps, you may have an IIS server, a web server, somewhere in your environment, or you may be hosting web apps on your applications or SQL Server. If you are doing that, your typical location for the web apps deployment is going to be C inetpub web apps and web services. Okay, so my files are backed up. Now what? So you'll need to store the backups off-site. So you want to take your backups via either tape or external drive, or maybe you're backing up to the cloud, and make sure that you take your backups away from your physical office location. You know, if something happens like a flood, power surge, or fire, and your backups are sitting right on top of your server stack, then you know, you're losing your backups. So and then also keep your shared backups away from any shared directory that have the potential of being affected by any malware. Okay, so what's the typical process for when we do a recovery? Of course, that depends on the environment and what has been lost, but I've had to do it a couple times for clients that had some sort of disaster but had sufficient backups. In one case, an entire server crashed, but they were lucky enough to have a recent upgrade project with us, so their old server was intact, and they were able to recover their custom reports. They were not taking regular backups of those folders, but since they did have a recent project and an old server with them, we were able to recover a lot of their reports. They did have good offsite backups of the databases, so we were able to restore their, I think, 3-day-old backups of their databases and restore them. So in the end, we were able to reinstall the application, all the third parties, the SQL Server, and the databases all within about a day. You know, it may take more time, it may take less time. It all depends on what was affected when the server crashed. So the process itself is certainly dependent on the type of issue, and there's a lot to consider. An example of a recovery process would involve a reinstallation and configuration of SQL Server, the restore of the databases and updating the databases to make sure they're pointing to the right server, or maybe the new server, an installation of Dynamics SL and all the third-party applications, a restore of a backed up copy of the applications folder after the install, a synchronized ownership scenario on the new server to get the security set up on the SQL Server. If you're using web apps, you would have to restore IIS and web apps if necessary. You would then have to install Management Reporter, recover reports, and then reconfigure the data mart. You would have to restore any SSRS configuration and reports, restore custom SQL jobs, any maintenance plans that you had set up on your old SQL Server. So as you can see, it's very involved. There's a lot of pieces, and if any of them are missing, you could be losing very important information. So am I doing this right? How do I verify that I'm taking regular backups of my database? So I'm going to show you that in my dev environment here. So if you open up SQL Server, you can see that if you expand databases, you can see your databases. And then if you expand management, you can see that there's maintenance plans set up. So if you expand maintenance plans, you can see I have a daily backup, a Tranlog backup, and weekly maintenance set up on my server. So the daily backup, and yours may not be called daily backup, but it's you can double click on any one of these and find out exactly what they're doing. It gives you a visual, so it goes from one step to the other, whatever it may be. The very first task here is called Backup Database Task. And you can double click it and find out exactly what it's doing. So we're choosing the databases. You can see here I'm not backing up the Management Reporter DM because it does not need any backups. I'm backing up the report servers and the application databases. If you look at the destination, this is where it's being backed up to. You can tell it to back up anywhere you'd like, and create a subdirectory for each database. So you can tell this to go to a different drive and back up regularly, and then you can take backups of that drive, whatever options that you choose. So that's telling me that I have a maintenance plan in place, but how do I know if it's working? So if you right click and click View History, you can see, I set this up yesterday, you can see that I have 2 green checkboxes indicating that these databases have successfully been backed up. If I see a red X here, and maybe a whole bunch of red X's, that means that I'm not getting regular backups. So you can click on these and expand, and down here in the error number and error message, it's going to tell you what went wrong. Maybe maybe the user that you had set up for these maintenance plans is no longer a user and it doesn't have access to take these backups. Or maybe your hard drive is filled up and it's not allowing any more backups. So definitely make sure that your backups are being taken regularly. If they're not, get a hold of your IT staff or give Synergy a call and see if we can rectify what's going on there. Another reason why your maintenance plan may be failing and not working is your SQL Server agent service. So on your SQL Server, there is a service called SQL Server Agent that actually runs these jobs. You can see the daily backup is actually a SQL Server job that's running on a schedule. So if this service is not running, then it's not going to take any daily backups. So it will probably tell you in the error log down here that the SQL Server Agent process service is not running. So you need to turn it on. The easiest way to do that is just right click and say start. But if it's not running, then chances are your server is not set up to start the SQL Server Agent process when it's booted up. So to get around that, you can open up Services and go find that service. There's the agent. You can see its startup type is manual. You want to change that to automatic or automatic delayed start, whatever it may be. So that means the next time your server is rebooted, it's going to automatically start this service, which is pretty important. By default, it's manual, and I'm not sure why, but you need to make sure that that's running at all times for your backups to work. Okay. So I'm a small business and I have no IT staff. How can I make backups on my own? Well, that's a loaded question. There are a lot of different methods for making backups. You can do as low tech as copy paste from your user reports or your applications folder to a disk drive and take that disk home with you every week or every few days, depending on how often you want that backup taken. There's a lot of software that you can go out and research and buy that automatically take regular backups of either specific files and folders or your entire server down to an image. And those softwares sometimes are free and sometimes you have to pay for it, but they're usually very good, and they take your backups and put them on drives for you that you can take with you. Let's see. I think that's all I have. I know this thing was scheduled for an hour, so if we have 25 minutes of questions, that's great. So
Okay, Kevin, is that all you have for now?
I think that's all I have for now.
Oh, I love this little cartoon. Good job on that. So, well, thank you for that. We will now open it up for Q&A, and if you don't want to participate, I'd like to thank you for attending today's webinar. Once you leave, you will receive a survey on the presentation, and we'd appreciate it if you would complete that and provide us with feedback. So with that, we will now start the Q&A. If you have any questions, you can submit them either via the questions chat window, or if you prefer to ask them live, just raise your hand and I will unmute you and you can ask it live. Okay, so I have a few questions coming in and I'll take the first one, Kevin. We have a question, will we be able to access a replay of this later? And yes, you will. We have a recording of it, or I'm recording it now, and so we'll make that available on our website. Kevin, do you want to take the next one? Can you see the question?
Let me see. I can almost see it. Hang on. Wow, that window is very small. Hold on.
You can expand it as you pull on the sides and things.
Ah, there we go. What? Oh boy. So what if a kite winds around a power line? So if your kite winds around a power line, well, I don't think you can take backups of much more than your databases in your machines.
Well, you know what I think you should do? Yeah, you should call Kite Man. Call Kite Man and to get it out. Don't try that yourself. Very dangerous. Very dangerous. Okay. Any other questions? Wonder if anybody's ever had the problem. As Kevin mentioned, we actually have had clients that do, you never think about doing backup and the importance of it until you really need it. So.
Yep, backup.
Oh, I see a question here. Hold on. I'll unmute you, John. There you go. John?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
We can.
Yeah. So I have a lot of Solomon databases, and they're in full recovery mode. And we are actually doing log shipping to a disaster recovery server that's like in another state. So if we run a update using database maintenance, the Dynamics SL database maintenance screen, that puts the databases into simple mode, which then breaks your chain of log transactions. Then I would have to rebuild log shipping. Is there a way around that?
I want to say I've heard something about that not being supported, but let me write that question down, and I'll definitely get you a better answer than that. Let's see, log shipping.
We have various third-party tools. Some of them are from Plumline. Some are from Silverbrook. The Silverbrook ones, when you install those, he has his own installation package, which doesn't throw the databases into recovery mode, or I'm sorry, into simple mode. But the ones from Plumline, if you just run their installation with database maintenance, those will break the log chain. So I was just kind of interested, if there's anything I can do to prevent that, especially in a case like, let's say that I was using an ACA product, and oftentimes, like those things actually have to be updated a couple of times during the run of the reports because some update from the feds or something. And so it's most inconvenient if you have to use database maintenance to run an update and it breaks log shipping or transaction logs every time.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I have that question written down. I'll try and get you a better answer than I don't think that's supported, and see if we can find a way to prevent them from switching the mode from full recovery to simple mode.
All right. Thanks a lot, man.
Hey, thanks. John, what was your last name?
Stewart.
Stewart. Okay.
Yep, and I'm recording that information for you as well, Kevin.
Okay.
So a few other questions have come in, and I'll read them so everybody can hear. We have Dynamics SL on one server and the database on another. We originally purchased the Dynamics SL server so it would contain both. We now want to free up the server with the database. What is involved in moving the database to the Dynamics server?
Okay, so what would be involved there is you would need to install SQL Server on your Dynamics SL server database or server, and get it configured, up and running, and then we would just need to migrate the databases over to that new server. Yeah, I don't think this is very involved. I mean, it's not like you'll be down for a few days. It really it doesn't take too long. You could, since they'll be completely different SQL servers, you could run it through a test and make sure everything's up and running in your test environment, which would actually eventually be your new live environment. So so yeah, we've migrated servers several times. This shouldn't be a problem. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, and another question is, I've never been to your website to pull webinars. Where exactly would I go to get this one so my IT department can view it? Well, first of all, the website is synergybusiness.com. I don't know if you want to pull this up on your screen, Kevin, so they could hear. And there is, in the very first line that you see, not on the tabs, there is a hyperlink to client resources where you can see different things. Now I have to actually, believe it or not, that is such a great question, Terry, is to make sure to find out where we have downloaded those. And as Kevin's pulling it up here, let me just, okay, so in the upper left hand, okay, so there you went to, you might want to show them the top of the screen again where you see the client.
Yeah, I was just making sure this is the right location. Yep, so under client success, there's training and webinars. If you scroll down a little bit, there's a few webinars there. I want to say that's not everything though.
Yeah, it might be, because the other webinars that are that there's a cost to, those aren't published for public domain, but only available for those that pay for them, Kevin. So that might be what you're thinking.
Okay. So here's some free webinars here.
And webinars on different third-party enhancements. Point out there are Dynamics SL how-to videos that are free for those that are current, and I think everybody is current on a maintenance plan with Microsoft.
Yep, so she's asking, after today, will this one be present on the website? So
yes.
Yes.
Yes, it takes a while to download it, but we should have that on there within 24 hours, Terry. Thank you. Any other questions? We'll take an opportunity to make sure everybody knows that if you've looked at any of my emails in the signature line, we do have a national SL user group coming up in St. Louis. That's coming up at the end of April. And I do have a code where if you want to attend that conference, you'll get $100 off registration. And if anybody has any questions or needs any information, please contact me directly, Rob, R-O-B, at synergybusiness.com, and I'd be happy to answer your questions. Or you can also talk to your account manager, Cindy, Frank, or Donna. Okay, any other questions? Anybody want to ask anything live? Raise your hand. Well, I think we've done it, Kevin. You've done a fantastic job. Thanks again, everyone, for attending the webinar today. You will receive a survey. Please take, it's multiple choice questions. It'll take you less than a minute to fill out, and we'd appreciate it. So with that, I will conclude this webinar.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kevin.